Welcome to Pure Passion. I'm your host, David Kyle Foster. One of the challenges faced by our culture today is the infiltration and manipulation of the secular media by gay activists in a well-designed strategy to change the way the population thinks about homosexuality. Some 20 years ago, PhD-level gay strategists devised a plan to deceive and coerce the public so that it would drop its well-entrenched opposition for special rights for homosexuals. In their plan, they spoke of sending Trojan horses into the world of straights through the media, of demonizing conservative pastors and manipulating the media as well as politicians so that they would become beholden to gay activist power brokers. They knowingly and repeatedly lied about the percentage of homosexuals in the population so as to increase their political influence. They lied about the scientific data concerning the origin of homosexual confusion, and they lied about the nature of those of us who seek to help homosexuals find salvation and healing through Jesus Christ. Today's guest, Dr. Warren Throckmorton, has been wading through these dark waters of gay activism for many years now and has come to give us a report on what he has uncovered. Dr. Throckmorton has also produced a DVD that asks the question, do ex-gays exist? In the DVD, he conducts interviews with several who have indeed found healing through the power of Jesus Christ. We'll be offering that DVD on today's program as well. So without further delay, let's listen in as Dr. Warren Throckmorton sets gay culture straight.
Why Do Exist is the story of 5 people who have really an interesting story to tell of change in their lives. Many people think of homosexuality as being, in a sense, a fixed condition, perhaps inborn. And many of the people, if not all of them, on this video that I interviewed, they thought that way too at one time. They thought that they were born gay. But then they made a change in their lives that many people in my profession of psychology and counseling say is impossible. They went from gay to straight, from exclusively homosexual to being exclusively heterosexual. Now, not all people describe that story of that complete change, but I thought it would be interesting to chronicle the story of these individuals because it's a story not often heard. I'm a counselor, and as well as being associate professor of psychology. And at that time, I owned a private practice in counseling, and that was the primary thing that I did. And I had a number of individuals come to me with dissatisfaction with their same-sex attractions. They wanted to experience change. They didn't feel that it fit their lives. They didn't feel it fit their religious beliefs. And so I did work with them and saw much change in many people. And about that time, professional associations were entertaining proposals that such work with people would be unethical. And I knew that there was effectiveness there. I knew that people found benefit in the work that I had done with them. And so I did a major literature review in professional work that's basically a review of all of the studies on a certain topic. And I did that concerning sexual orientation change and found that there were quite a few studies that showed change of various degrees with people who were once identified as homosexual but wanted to affirm a heterosexual identity. So I published that report in a peer-reviewed journal, and then again in 2002 published another report of an update of those kinds of studies. And so increasingly I became interested in the lives of people who were making changes and doing things that professional societies such as my own were saying were not even possible. In some cases saying they didn't exist. There's one research report from a man named Joseph Wolpe who basically didn't do any aversive counseling. He did assertiveness training. And he found a young person that came into his office and said, I want to be straight. And he told him, I don't think you can be. I don't think it's possible. So they went through a course of assertiveness training to work on some other types of problems. Well, lo and behold, in a few months, the man came back and said, you know what? I'm not attracted to men anymore. In fact, I've been dating a girl, and pretty soon we're going to be married. And this giant in the field of psychology couldn't understand what had happened. And so he wrote about this very humbly, saying, you know, I think I overestimated or underestimated the potential for human change here. As I look at the issue of whether homosexuality is a disorder or not, that many people still, talk about, what occurs to me is that it's only been for about 100 years in our history that homosexuality was even considered a disorder, since about the 1860s. Prior to that, homosexual behavior was considered, in a sense, a moral question. And so I'm not so sure that with the change of that occurred in 1973, that it was altogether a political issue. I think one of the things that was happening at the very same time that truly homosexual activists were lobbying strongly the American Psychiatric Association to make this change is that the way mental disorders were defined was being changed. Many people don't understand that the way that disorders were defined prior to when Robert Spitzer came on the scene in the early 70s was based upon a theoretical perspective of psychoanalysis, more of a Freudian view. And that view basically said that we know what your problem is before you ever tell us about your life, because Freud essentially theorized that all neuroses and problems derived from bad experiences before you were 6 years old with your parents. And maybe not even bad experiences, but just the way you perceived your parents before you were 6 set your life course. And so disorders were based upon that kind of a theoretical foundation. Psychiatry moved away from Freudian psychoanalysis starting in the 60s and 70s. And so many disorders are now, in a sense, defined by their symptoms and not by what might have caused them. And that's kind of why homosexuality was in there in the first place, because it was assumed that homosexuals were, in a sense, produced by poor upbringing, bad family situations, and that's why it should be there in the DSM, the Statistical Manual for Diagnoses, in the first place. So as psychiatry moved away from a theoretical foundation for disorders and toward a behavioral one, they started looking at, well, are people upset or unhappy by this, their issue, whatever the issue is? Does it prevent them from living a well-adjusted life? And certainly in some cases that would be true of people who struggle with same-sex attraction. But for others it might not be. And so homosexuality just per se was taken out. But one thing many people don't realize, in the current list of disorders is something called sexual disorder not otherwise specified, which basically is a general category for sexual disorder. And one of the criteria for that disorder is persistent and marked distress over sexual orientation. There's still, in a sense, a reason somebody might consult a counselor if they're experiencing that. There is a presupposition on the part of individuals who oppose all efforts to counsel with people who are dissatisfied or in distress about their sexuality, that this distress has only one cause, and that is some kind of social pressure. Instead of actually talking to people and finding out what their situation is, why they're dissatisfied or distressed, many gay affirming counselors won't do that. They will simply say, you're born that way and there's nothing you can do about it. The individuals in the video, I Do Exist, a couple of them tell stories just like that they were basically told by their counselors before the counselors even got to know them and know their background, that they were born that way and there was nothing they could do about it. The list of disorders that I've been referring to that psychiatrists uses is a comprehensive list, and it does still include pedophilia. And yet there is, in a sense, kind of a loophole in there that some people are quite concerned about, that says that it's only a disorder if the person's unhappy about it, or if it causes them distress, or if it's a barrier to their occupation or their life success. Well, you know, that is going much farther on the value neutrality issue than many people are prepared to go.
Your passion that beats for Christ alone. Your passion, nothing less.
One of the finer DVD resources that has come out in the past few years has been Dr. Warren Throckmorton's DVD, I Do Exist. In this well-produced DVD, Dr. Throckmorton airs interviews with numerous young people who have come out of the homosexual lifestyle. This fascinating look into the lives of 5 homosexuals answers many questions surrounding the possibility of change. This documentary describes the process of how some have transitioned into a new heterosexual life. Some describe profound reorientation of sexual and personal feelings, leading to a greater sense of self-awareness and self-satisfaction. Supplementing the personal stories of change are the observations of psychiatrist Dr. Robert Spitzer, psychology professors Dr. Mark Yarhouse, Dr. Warren Throckmorton, and Arthur Goldberg. To get your copy of I Do Exist, just go to purepassion.us. Videotaped copies are also available by calling our office at 615-507-4166.
There's been a whole host of approaches to demonstrating a biological let me separate two things too, influence and determination. Often the press reports studies that may show genetic influence or association to homosexual feelings and calls that determinism. And that's a big mistake that a lot of people make. But the public can be forgiven for thinking we're one study away from finding the gay gene because of the way the media reports this, but also the way that some of these researchers talk about their own work. Dean Hamer is an individual who first came on the scene advancing the gay gene theory. He claimed that he found a place on the genome that linked up very strongly with homosexuality. Unfortunately for him and that theory, that study has not been replicated. Even the most recent attempt to replicate it just this past March was not successful. The researcher in that case was a colleague of Dr. Hamer, and said that, well, there's probably not one gay gene, there's probably several places on the human genome that would associate with homosexuality. It counted 3 places. The problem was that none of those locations on the genome met the criteria for statistical significance, and yet the media reported in the press that 3 places now, there were 3 genes, not just one, that would relate to sexual orientation development. Dr. LeVay initially in the early 90s took a look at hypothalamus size in gay men versus straight men and found that there was a difference in a certain portion, certain area of hypothalamus. There are many problems with that particular work. Basically what he was trying to show is that there are differences between the brains of gay men and straight men in an area of the brain that would influence sexual feelings. Now, this study's been widely criticized and is also unreplicated. A team of William Bine and I think it's Bruce Parsons took a look at that study and found some very, very meager differences between the brains of gay men and straight men that they analyzed, but no difference in size of the hypothalamus. There have been other attempts to look at brain differences, but in one recent study, a Swedish study, did find that gay men reacted differently than straight men via CAT scans analysis in the hypothalamic area to smells of men. And so there is some probable differences in the way that gay men and straight men may react to certain stimuli, but really that's not a very surprising finding. What is at issue is how did they get that way? And the Swedish authors were very clear that that study said nothing about how those men got that way. They were all sexual experienced. Sexual response is highly responsive to learning, as is smell. And so the study authors said, we don't know how those brains got the way they did. It's very likely that they could have learned and shaped their brain. We know from research on the brain that it's much more plastic than we thought 20 years ago. And so brain changes do occur because of experience. And so any changes that you find in adult brains say nothing about how those changes got that way. Well, there have been several studies of cohorts, groups of identical twins. Michael Bailey from Northwestern is most closely associated with that research. He initially found, through researching twins in this country through volunteers, that about 48 to 52% of twins shared homosexuality with their identical twin. However, he did another study, a follow-up, on an Australian sample of a group of twins that was much better collected. He even said so in his study, that this sample, this cohort's much better research work, and found only 20 to 24%, 20% of men and 24% of women shared a concordance on homosexuality, which means there's a great deal of discordance on sexual orientation when it comes to identical twins. And so he said in his study that essentially there's no relationship between twins and sexual orientation. Again, many people don't realize that. Many people are still quoting the 50% study, and yet this new study is much better designed, and it shows a much lower concordance, and the researchers in that study said that there's basically no relationship. There's something else going on when it comes to the development of same-sex feelings and subsequent gay identity. There is and the researchers said this in this study, that there's pretty clearly what are called non-shared environmental factors, meaning that among twins, family can't be all there is to it either. That there have to be some things that individual twins go through in the environment that lead them then to experience something different sexually than their twin did. And I think that's a pretty fair assessment, that environment plays considerable role, but it can be different for different people. You can't really say there's one type of environment that's the ground for all same-sex attraction, and I think that's what that study does support.
Your passion that beats for Christ alone. Your passion, nothing less.
One of the finer DVD resources that has come out in the past few years has been Dr. Warren Throckmorton's DVD, I Do Exist. In this well-produced DVD, Dr. Throckmorton airs interviews with numerous young people who have come out of the homosexual lifestyle. This fascinating look into the lives of 5 homosexuals answers many questions surrounding the possibility of change. This documentary describes the process of how some have transitioned into a new heterosexual life. Some describe profound reorientation of sexual and personal feelings, leading to a greater sense of self-awareness and self-satisfaction. Supplementing the personal stories of change are the observations of psychiatrist Dr. Robert Spitzer, psychology professors Dr. Mark Yarhouse, Dr. Warren Throckmorton, and Arthur Goldberg. To get your copy of I Do Exist, just go to purepassion.us. Videotaped copies are also available by calling our office at 615-507-4166.
If there is a theme that I have found repeatedly, it's a feeling of difference that the young men and women describe. And in the I Do Exist video, we talk about that a good bit, that all of the people involved felt just different in some way or another from their same-sex peers, to the point where those same-sex peers looked other to them. They seemed almost distinct to them, and they almost look like the opposite sex. And so for them, their curiosity, their, in a sense, longing to have the qualities of the opposite or the same-sex peer that they idolized, that became to them, at some point, it crossed over from curiosity to attraction, to a curiosity not about their strengths or their characteristics, but a curiosity about even their bodies. And then that focus then turned into sexual attraction. This sense of difference that comes along at puberty is accentuated by the fact that in our schools there are groups that form, and often around sports, or, if you will, masculine activities, and men or feminine activities, and men and women who, young boys and girls who feel different, even if they aren't, but they feel removed from that world, often wonder if the reason they feel that way is because of these longings to be like that, which turn into sexual feelings. That's really confusing then for many young men and women, because they wonder, well, if I have these feelings, maybe I'm gay or lesbian. I had one young man I was working with who was an athlete. He was, in fact, pretty accomplished, a football player. And yet he went to a school where most of the kids were well-dressed. They were a lot of emphasis among the boys, among having very stylish, expensive clothes that his family couldn't afford. He felt different and ostracized, in a sense, from that vision of masculinity in his school. His was not the typical school. You know, in many schools, the sports players are the ones that have the social value, in a sense. They're the ones that are looked up to, but not in this school. And he felt very different from that. And he began to, in a sense, desire strongly to be like those other guys, to have a slimmer figure, to have those kind of physical characteristics. And for him, that intense focus became associated with sexual drive.
You know, sometimes I'm asked, why does the experience of being healed from homosexual confusion vary so widely? Well, in previous segments, we've discussed how some folks either refuse to or for some other reason fail to enter into the healing process as God designed it. They're fixed on their own vision of how God should do it, or focused on their own efforts in making it happen. In many cases, people put a stopwatch on God. If He doesn't produce results they expect within the time frame they demand, they give up. Others who falter make the mistake of taking their cues from the lukewarm Christian culture around them. They use failed or compromised Christian friends or leaders as their model rather than Christ Himself. Many have trouble because they suffered from perfectionism. When they see that their healing is unlikely to meet their own perfect standard, they draw back. In their mind, doing something imperfectly is worse than not doing it at all. Some simply grow weary in the battle and give up. We all grow weary in the battle at times, but some use that as an excuse to return to their former way of living. Their focus has never shifted from their own comfort to living for the glory of God. So when the pain of healing or the fray of the battle approaches, they shrink back in order to avoid such pain and conflict. Another problem is that some people never hunger and thirst for righteousness. Why? Because they do not spend time alone with God on a regular basis. They never develop intimacy with Him. Consequently, His passion for holiness never gets fixed in their hearts. Another reason for the variety of experience in healing is that each person begins the process at a different level of mental and spiritual knowledge and health. Some people don't know a blessed thing about God, and they have got a lot to learn. Others were raised in the church, but they had a bad experience and need to heal just from that. Others are so psychologically and emotionally messed up when they get saved that it takes a while for them to see and think clearly enough to appropriately respond to the new impulses of the Holy Spirit within them. Many other reasons could be cited for why one person's healing might take longer than another's. Praise God that His grace and patience extends even to the most difficult case.
That's exactly what often the gay apologist will do, is will say, because you have these feelings or these memories, that means your orientation is basically still the same. And maybe you've added, something to become bisexual, but that your basic orientation has not changed. And I think that really misunderstands the impact and the role of memory in the lives of people. I think many people who are ex-gay are way too critical of themselves because they have memories of past sexual experiences with men. I don't know why they wouldn't have those experiences. There's so many triggers in life and in the world that can trigger off those kinds of memories that I'm not sure why they wouldn't have them. No one is saying that change means your frontal lobe is erased. No one is saying that your memory is erased. What we are saying, though, is that you, in a sense, identify and orient yourself to a different way. You organize your life around your beliefs about what you believe to be right, about what you believe to be ultimate in the world. And that's what a change of orientation is, in my mind, is that you basically say, I'm going to orient myself and my identity and my life around what I believe to be true about the world and myself and others, and not around my feelings that I don't approve of.
Do you believe a homosexual can change? When you consider that a rather high percentage of people struggle with partial confusion in their sexual identity, you've undoubtedly met dozens who have found enough healing to fully function as heterosexuals. Even when it comes to that small percentage of 2 to 3% of the population who identify themselves as gay, there are still probably tens of thousands and perhaps even millions of them who have changed. When the famed Masters and Johnson clinics claim a higher success rate in gay reparative therapy than they do for alcoholics, you know it must be possible, especially for the person who seeks the power of God to heal them and set them free. I, for one, have been freed from that lifestyle for over 27 years. Many of my ex-gay friends have been married for decades with children of their own. So the real question should be, are there any who can't be set free? The answer lies, of course, in people's free will choices, and which God they turn to for help. Only through Jesus Christ, the Creator and Redeemer of mankind, can permanent transformation occur. For more resources on this subject and Dr. Throckmorton's DVD, I Do Exist, visit us at purepassion.us. Until next week, I'm David Kyle Foster for all of us here at Pure Passion, wishing you the wisdom and discernment that recognizes truth.